Good morning, class. My name is Professor Donner. This is creative writing. If you're looking for anthropology, that's with Beth Ryan, down the hall in 212. I see a few familiar faces here, which is either comforting or alarming. Now, as we begin our 5th season, we've got a very special treat for you all. Our own Phil Perlman has finished his novel, and he's going to share it with the class today.
Thank you, Professor.
No, thank you, Phil. I know it's been a process getting to this point, but I'm proud to say you finally made it. And speaking for the class, we're looking forward to hear what you've been working on all this time.
Well, here it is if you'd like to read it for everyone.
Phil, I'd love to read your book cover to cover, but I think we'd like to hear your words in your voice.
Oh, okay. That's fine. My book is called 40 Yards of Naugahyde, A Girl in a Dream. And it's the story of my life, exactly as I lived it, which is what Professor Donner's been teaching us, to write what we know.
I appreciate that, Phil.
Here we go. My story begins as I took my first breath of cold Polish air on a nondescript winter day in 1919. I was welcomed into the world as the first of what would become 3 children my parents would produce. But I don't remember much about my Polish life, aside from the smell of bread and potatoes, the sound of livestock in the fields, and the sight of the land of my forefathers disappearing beneath the Atlantic Ocean as we left our home behind and sought out a better life in the land of opportunity. While my mother cried for all she was leaving behind, I most remember the look on my father's face as we left port and headed into the open ocean. One without the memory of his father's face ingrained into his mind might have missed it, but in that moment, a curl of the lip and wet eyes told me all I needed to know about the gravity of the adventure we were undertaking. My father was a quiet man, stoic, hard-working, but with warm hands and a warm heart, as my mother liked to say. And to see this unshakable man of stone crack under the circumstance was something I found profoundly powerful as a child of 4. My mother was the talker of the two. She drew a hard line and her wooden spoon was quick to correct. But it was only because she expected excellence in character and fair judgment. Although they'd seemed a mismatched pair, they shared an unshakable bond built on common values and mutual respect. We crossed the ocean chasing a dream. More specifically, chasing my father's dream. It was a simple one: to own some land on which to work and raise his family. And my mother shared that vision. But landing in Brooklyn after passing through Ellis Island, that dream was not something one could walk off the boat and achieve. With $7 to his name, my father took a job at a factory assembling children's toys, and my mother took to raising the growing brood. From humble beginnings in a single room, we slowly made our way towards a better life. But while my father never forgot his dreams, the Great Depression came along and changed everything. The children's toy industry did not fare well against the collapse of American capitalism. My father's paycheck and his penchant for success dwindled, but he never lost hope. As time went by, the market struggled to recover, shaken and shell-shocked. But children kept being born, and eventually, the toy industry picked back up. By this time, my father had moved up the corporate ladder. He was in the prime of his life, but with greater responsibilities at work came less and less time spent at home, spending days or weeks on the road as his children effectively grew up without a father. Coming up in New York, in the throes of the Depression, without the strong guiding hand of a father, I learned from the streets and the tenements how to be a man. And as time progressed, I found few ways in which to relate to my father. "But why you do this?" became his response to my stories of everyday life in the hustle and bustle of the big city. He implored me on many occasions to pick up some tools, learn to use my hands, and ultimately follow in his footsteps. In the odd hours of the night, I would often hear my father talking to my mother in their native tongue, one that they were certain I had forgotten as I learned English in the New World, about how he wished he could leave the factory job and open his own shop. Perhaps he had learned enough to launch his own line of toys. Perhaps he learned enough about business to open his own store right here in the city. Perhaps I could share in his craft, inherit his vision. And for a while, I did just that. I picked up his tools, I tinkered in his trade, I began to save a bit of money. And everything was going exactly how my father had envisioned it, until disaster struck in Pearl Harbor. I considered myself a lover, not a fighter. And don't bother explaining that to the draft board. I was a 22-year-old, first-generation New Yorker, and I found myself on the receiving end of the military draft within weeks of the attack. My father was inconsolable. As Isaac Asimov once said, it's not only the living who are killed in war. My father, you see, had gotten us out of Poland, and after living through the war to end all wars, on the other side of the ocean, no less, the country that had given us so much was sending me back to fight the same people we once lived peacefully alongside. But like at a lumpet, I soon found myself on a ship bound for combat in my native Poland. But little did I realize, as I departed that dreary day, I would have nothing but memories and faded photographs with which to remember my family, as I would return an honorable soldier and an orphan. An illness as old as humanity took both my parents from this earth before their natural end. Consumption, wasting, tuberculosis. An outbreak struck our neighborhood, but my father refused to heed the warnings. In letters I received from my mother, before she too was struck down by the disease, she would tell me how they needed to live their lives. That they came to this country to be free, and wouldn't let anyone tell them otherwise. But the irony is not lost on me, that had they exercised the slightest bit of restraint, and heeded the wisdom of those who understand these things, then they would have been alive to see their firstborn son return from the war a hero. But some things are just not meant to be. I was a 26-year-old veteran, without any guidance or mooring at the end of the war. My siblings had their own families and their own lives. I got a small apartment and some odd jobs to pay the bills, but I was drifting. I'd spent my time before the war building towards my father's dream, and never took the time to reflect and realize that it was not my own. I lost myself. What did I want out of this life? Why was I here when so many of my friends didn't make it home? Did I even have a home without a place to return to? One particular Tuesday, I was in between jobs and wandering the city. I noticed a help wanted sign in the window of a small furniture repair shop. Despite having 3 part-time jobs already, I had nothing to lose, so I headed inside. I was immediately taken by the comfort and the colors of a myriad of fabrics and smells. A girl behind the counter beckoned me to approach. She smiled with the direct kindness that radiates from a warm heart. I've never been a man of few words, but she struck me speechless. I forgot why I had come here, where I was, what I was doing.
Can I help you?
She said. Yes, I uttered finally, flustered and timid. I thought of my first fight on the front lines. The whistling of the bullets past each ear. The packing sound of lead on flesh. The screams of fear and sorrow from my brothers in arms. And the being of radiant light that descended from the clouds of artillery fire and placed her hand on my shoulder. A look of calm and concern written across her furrowed brow, bringing me back to the present.
There you are,
she said calmly.
Welcome back. The war wasn't easy on you, was it?
How did you know? I replied.
Every soldier gets that look in his eye when his mind wanders back to the war. But it's okay. You're here now. And that's all that matters.
But where are we?
New York, of course.
I meant this store. What is it? I saw the sign in the window and wanted to inquire.
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess you sent my mind elsewhere as well.
Like me taking you to dinner to celebrate my getting the job?
Well, you certainly work fast, Mr.
Perlman. Call me Phil.
Wonderful to meet you, Phil. I'm Adele.
I'll see you at 5, Adele, I told her as I turned towards the door.
Wait, Phil! I didn't even tell you what the job is.
If it's working with you, then it doesn't matter. I'll do it.
I'll see you at 5 then.
She smiled as I left the store and headed north. I kept my composure for a block or two, but I couldn't hide the grin that crept across my face. I had never been so brash, so forward. But something about Adele told me that she was the next chapter of my life that I had been looking for ever since returning from the war. It turns out Adele and I had more in common than we realized. She lost her father to service in the war, and in turn inherited his furniture repair business. But she was woefully over her head in trying to run the place. We talked over dinner and walked the streets together until it was too dark to see. I told her about my attempts to chase my father's dream by making dolls and toys, but not finding any personal joy in the pursuit. She mirrored my sentiment in having no desire to repair furniture, a pursuit her father never intended her to follow, but one that she fell into with his passing. As the moon rose over the skyline, we made a promise to each other that whatever dream we ended up chasing next, we would do it together. As I walked her home, she took my hand and interlaced her fingers with mine.
You've got warm hands, she said.
I'm sorry about that, I told her.
I don't mind,
she replied.
It means you have a warm heart.
As I bid her goodnight and headed back home to my lonely single-room apartment, I couldn't help thinking of everything that had to happen to lead me to this moment. What the next day, the next week, or even the next few years would bring. But life has a way of intervening when we least expect it. A 3-alarm fire filled the neighborhood with sirens and smoke that shattered the silence of an otherwise ordinary city night. At 3 a.m., an improperly stored container of wood shavings was ignited by a bit of shoddy wiring that lit up the furniture repair building with swift burning flames, fueled by acetone, dried wood, and drafty windows. When I arrived at the storefront, I saw Adele sitting on the stoop, holding a bolt of fabric to her chest, despondent. The last of the embers had been extinguished, and the fire chief was explaining the severity of the situation. While the apartments upstairs were spared from the flames, smoke and water had permeated the entire structure, and almost nothing in the shop or the storefront could be saved. Adele nodded her head in acceptance, but the look in her eye was 1,000 miles away. When the emergency crews departed, the sound of the city filled the early morning air, but the cacophony of silence between us was palpable. I sat beside her on the stoop as the sun rose between the shadows of the skyline. She squeezed the fabric tightly as tears crept down her cheeks. I felt a kinship in this feeling of profound loss, and I knew full well that nothing I could say would ease the pain or make all the bad things go away. So I simply sat with her and let the silence surround us, sharing space and being there. "Thank you," she said, barely above a whisper. "For what?" I replied. "For being honest with me. For not saying it'll be fine when it never will be. The business was barely afloat as it was. There's no way I can come back from this. I don't know if I'd want to after all this. It was my father's dream. I just inherited it. Truth be told, I'd much rather look at furniture than fix it." "What's your dream, Adele?" "I don't know. I've never been asked that before. It was never really up to me." "I never knew your father, but if he was anything like mine, he wouldn't care what you did, so long as you did it honestly." Which is an ironic thing to say since he pushed me so hard to follow in his footsteps. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what we do, so long as we do it well. You make it sound so easy to start over. We're not starting over. We're simply starting a new chapter in the book we started yesterday. Yesterday. When I first laid eyes on you yesterday, I told myself that this woman was either gonna ruin me or make me a better man. Which is it? I'll let you know when I figure it out. But for now, we are two unemployed adults with a burned-out storefront and a bolt of tear-stained fabric. The world is our oyster. Will you promise me something? Maybe. I only make promises I intend to keep. Wherever we go, whatever we do, please stay exactly the way you are. I knew it. She was gonna ruin me. Adele smiled and took my hand in hers. We sat on the stoop and basked in the mid-morning sun and the sweet cadence of new love. The night of the fire was the last time we were ever apart. With what money we had between us, we got married and boarded a train to Los Angeles. New York contained too much sadness to start our new life. though we struggled and experimented with finding dreams to chase, we ironically found our way to the furniture finishing business. With the last bit of my savings, I took a chance on a wholesale shipment of Naugahyde fabric, and my wife soon uncovered a passion she didn't know she had. Upholstery. Colors, textures, patterns, shapes. They were the paint on her palette. And soon, we caught the eye of studio art departments and were creating custom pieces for television and movie sets. Adele found her dream, and I helped her chase it for the next 30 years. Now, I never had my own dreams, but that's okay. I dreamed by proxy. My dream, if I had one, was to support my wife and my family, to leave a better world for our daughter than the one either of us was born into. I got to watch the sunrise in my wife's eyes every single day, and while it may not be a fast car or $1 million home, I wouldn't trade it for the world. After we laid Adele to rest last year, it became a struggle to find myself. I feel like I'm sitting on that stoop in New York, clutching that same bolt of tear-stained fabric and wondering what to do now. Where does life go from here? Does life go on from here? But even when the days feel darkest, I know that she wouldn't want me to live a life without a dream to chase. And I know that when that day comes, when I feel the sunset on my eyes for the last time, that she will be there to sit on the stoop beside me, reflect in silent solitude, not try to fix it or make everything better, and just exist beside me one more time. The life we live is our own. In the end, as long as we are happy, then any life is worth living. And I believe we live multiple lives if we count down our days. My introduction to this world took me across oceans to live and to fight alongside my peers, and to say goodbye to those that raised me, and ultimately led me to a furniture store that would change my life for the better. My life began the day after that fire, but the love it ignited in me will keep me burning long after I'm gone. I know it because I lived it. With 40 yards of Naugahyde, a girl, and a dream. The end.
It's so beautiful.
Thank you. It's very good, Phil. Very, very good. I mean, 40 yards of Naugahyde, a girl, and a dream. What can I say? Well, I wrote it just like I lived it, which is what you've been teaching us, to write what we know. It's very good, Phil. It'll blow the lid off the upholstery business as we know it. Thank you. This has been the premiere episode of Season 5 of Stories Telling Stories. We're glad you're here. The STS Network delivers high-quality pop culture content from around the globe to your frontal lobe, directly into your brain head. The STS Network of shows is available on the Stories Telling Stories YouTube channel and in traditional audio format on Spotify, Apple Music, and wherever podcasts are found. STS is 100% independent with no ads and no corporate sponsors cluttering up the content thanks to the generosity of our patrons. And you can help keep it that way with a donation on PayPal or by joining the Stories Telling Stories Patreon for $1 a month or more. And if you like what you hear, please leave a 5-star review and share this episode with your family and friends so we continue to grow the series through Season 5 and beyond. And until next time, a writer writes, always, and stay whimsical. I forgot that's a different show.